welcome to this edition of Parent to Parent, Glimpses and Stories from the NICU Unit. Today we have with us Jackie. Hello, Jackie.
Hi, how you doing? Good to talk to you, Shanti.
Yes, very good to talk to you. And
At
Jackie
last.
go ahead.
At last, after all the technical issues.
Yes. What is that, 35 minutes of technical issues?
Oh well, that's the beauty about live broadcasts.
Yes, it is. Jackie had a son in the NICU unit, and he happened to be there for 7 months. His name is Noah. Would you care to share a little bit about that, Jackie?
Sure. My NICU journey is, it's really quite interesting because when I was going through the entire experience, it was obviously the lowest time of my life, but really I looked in a way, one of my coping mechanisms was to kind of tell myself, look, if I come out of this experience intact, I'm going to be so incredibly strong, I'd be able to face anything that the world throws at me after this. Okay, but my NICU journey essentially started when I was going in for regular checkups with my pregnancy. By that stage, my marriage had already broken down, so I was going through all these prenatal screenings and all that on my own. And I found out just at the particular, you know how they have like ultrasounds and that sort of stuff. At that point where they said, "Oh, next ultrasound, you come in, and we will be able to determine the gender of the baby you're carrying." I thought, great, you know, I go in thinking I'll be able to find out today whether it's going to be a boy or a girl. That's when the doctors pulled me aside and said, "Look, we've got bad news for you because a couple of things. I mean, we can't determine for sure unless we run actual tests. But from what we can see from the ultrasound, it looks as though there's a strong possibility that your son is going to have basically has Down syndrome." Okay, and the way they picked it up was just based on some of the defects they picked up in the screening. And I'm really sorry. And of course, as soon as I start talking, my nose starts running. Just give me 2 seconds. Let me just see if I can grab some tissues. Sorry.
That's perfectly fine. Actually, we had so many technical difficulties. She had pictures of Noah. I had pictures of Noah. And we had lots to share about Noah. Very, very precious. I love how you've actually logged him, Jackie, and you've done a great job of chronologizing and actually taking pictures of your experience, and I think that's wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, there are always going to be naysayers and that sort of stuff who question your motives for doing this sort of thing, you know, because I'm a little bit of because I run my own business, so I have some level of public recognition out there about what I do and that sort of stuff. So some people might think you're being opportunistic, but to me, the way I reconcile my sharing about Noah and his experience and all that is really, I think, ultimately, you know, people always, I mean, first of all, I'm very big on kind of like, you know, just basically going out and doing things regardless of what the world throws at you. I think we're in this particular culture where people think, oh, you know, I can't do this if, you know, they basically make excuses for why they're not where they're at in their life. And I'm not saying that I've arrived in the world, but what I'm trying to prove to other people is that regardless of your circumstances and that sort of stuff, you can actually still live a full and, you know, fulfilling life, really. And that's what I try and convey with Noah, because there was a lot of opposition with regards to, you know, him even existing today, even before he was born, when the doctors first brought up the fact that he was going to need heart surgery and he was going to need life-saving bowel surgery. And that was just the start of it, really. But there was a lot of subtle and not so subtle pressure about basically terminating the pregnancy, not the least from from my what is now my ex-husband, you know, who, you know, despite whatever pro-life views he espoused prior to me getting pregnant, he thought, look, you know, if you're having a retard for a baby, you know, you're better off aborting him and that sort of stuff. So that was pretty tough to deal with. But ultimately, I think even medical professionals really, you know, kept trying to, they kept trying to reiterate the fact that I really should get screened to know once and for all whether he had Down syndrome, because they kept reminding me that the cutoff for legal termination of a pregnancy is, I don't know what it is, 20, 24 weeks, I don't know. But at some point, every time basically I went into hospital, they tried to remind me of the fact that I'm nearing the cutoff, you know, you sure you don't want to get screened? I was saying, look, you know, I've already made up my mind, you know, if there's a strong possibility that he has Down syndrome, then so be it. I'll just work on the fact that he does have it. And then if he doesn't, as it turned out, then well and good, But what nearly tipped me over the edge was when one of these medical professionals, I don't know if she was a doctor or something like that, but during one of my regular prenatal screenings, she told me, look, you should get it screened just so you can actually determine the level of severity of his Down syndrome affliction. That way you can prepare for him when he arrives, So I said, okay, well, in that case, let's do it, So next time I went in to see another doctor, I said, look, okay, I'm good. I'm going to go ahead with the screening after all. She said, oh, great, let's do it. Young lady, you're leaving this very late because you've really only got, like, I don't know, days before the actual, the legal cutoff date. So I said, no, I'm not doing it to determine whether I was going to keep the baby. I'm doing it to find out how severely afflicted he is with Down syndrome. And she's going to say, there's no such screening. She says, that test only determines yes or no whether he has it. There's no way you can tell how bad his bad is a bad word, but yeah, how severe it is, sort of thing. So she said, I don't know why the other doctor told you that, so that was incorrect. So I don't know if that was a deliberate, misleading, information that was fed, or whether that other doctor or whatever she was actually did not know her facts, sort of thing. But when he was closer towards when I was due to give birth, they found that he was starting to there was too much water in my womb, and I was very, very big. And they decided that the water was getting into his lungs and he was drowning, sort of thing. So they started giving me steroid injections and started getting me to come in on a 3 times a week to basically try and do some monitoring for a couple of hours each time to make sure everything was okay. And also, essentially, they said, look, he's dying in the womb. And they gave me the option, look, we can either deliver him now and, risk, basically, obviously, with any pregnancy, the longer the baby stays in, the better, right? They say, deliver him now and risk him dying, or leave him in your womb and let him die naturally, or, try and prolong the pregnancy as much as we can. So I went with the third option. And one of the days that I went in for this test, essentially, they detected more abnormalities. And they said, look, we're going to have to keep you here overnight, And I had come with nothing prepared. I thought I was just, I parked my car in the hospital car park, thought I was just going to go in, for another steroid injection and for more monitoring. And what happened was, they said, we're going to have to keep you here overnight. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do? I don't even have a, toothbrush with me, sort of thing. And what ultimately happened was when they kept me overnight, I was ready to go home the next day. They said they just wanted to get the doctor to assess me and that sort of stuff. They thought maybe I was coming down with a cold and causing the readings to be irregular. And what ultimately happened was they ended up having to give me an emergency cesarean to deliver him the next morning, the next day.
How many weeks were you?
I was, jeepers, 34, 33 weeks. So he wasn't like technically that premature. But, and I know a lot of people, you go through life hearing a lot about, all these sayings and that sort of stuff about, people who need people are the luckiest people in the world and whatever, that song, Yeah. But my personal experience through all this was that I was a lot better off being independent, being completely, non-dependent on other people. Because even by virtue of the fact that I had to stay overnight at the hospital with nothing, and all I was thinking was, oh, damn, my car's stuck in the car park, and Australian car park rates are crazy expensive, and I didn't know how long I was going to stay in there for, and I was alone in the hospital. A lot of these examples, me being abandoned during my pregnancy and that sort of stuff, made me determined to not need anybody's help. Because when I actually called up my daughter to say, oh, look, it looks like I'm going to have to stay in the hospital, would you mind packing an overnight bag and bringing it with you, she doesn't drive, so she did that, and then she tried to hit up my ex-husband. This is my first marriage, not my second, not the father of my son. Would you mind dropping me off at the hospital, because mom looks like, she's in trouble and she needs to stay in the hospital, and also that way, I can get my boyfriend to take her car out of the car park and sort all that stuff out, because, I could be in the hospital for days,
Yeah.
And then her father wanted to do that, and then his his new partner didn't like the thought of it. She thought I was being too dependent on him, you know. So you know, that just kind of like caught me in the bind. You know, apparently his partner said essentially that, you know, that she didn't want me to continue to rely on him for this sort of stuff. I was thinking, I'm not asking him to come over to change the bloody light bulb. I'm asking him to come because I'm in trouble, you know. So ultimately, I was in the hospital on my own. I gave, you know, I was wheeled into, you know, for emergency cesarean on my own, and you know, I didn't see Noah. They took him to NICU right away, and you know, and 3 days later I was discharged, and I was told, look, you're not going to be able to drive for 6 to 8 weeks post cesarean because it will void your car insurance and that sort of stuff, you know, if you have an accident. And even on the 3rd day, when it was time for me to check out, I called up one of my family again, look, can you take me home? You know, I was about half an hour away from home. And they came, and of course, you know, being a cheap Asian, they didn't want to put their car in the car park. Again, you know, the whole car park's very expensive thing. They set their car illegally parked, you know, while waiting for me to be discharged. And invariably with any hospital, I'd imagine, but with the public hospital system, the doctors were late in signing off my discharge papers. And then she basically abandoned me. She said, look, you know, my car's illegally parked. I'm just gonna have to wait downstairs to make sure there are no parking rangers. Yeah, I'll pay for your stupid parking, you know. And then after an hour and a half, she said, look, I'm gonna have to go because my husband is at home looking after the grandkids, and even though he hadn't rung to say he needed help, so I can imagine he's probably stressed out by the grandkids by now, so I'm just gonna leave you here and go home. I was thinking, freak, you know, I've got a son who's dying in NICU. I've just had a cesarean. I'm completely on my own, you know, and now you're just gonna leave me here at the hospital, you know. So I was really, really, I mean, fundamentally determined to never ever ever have to rely on anyone again, and that just gave me that kind of like, you know, basically resilience and the kind of like determination to not be a victim. So that's the kind of mentality I took into my whole NICU experience, and I certainly did not expect to be spending 7 months there. And it's quite funny because building up to my you know, my hospital stay, you know, just trying to find out what was going to happen in the future and that sort of stuff. I actually grew up in a fairly, I guess, you know, strongly Christian upbringing, you know, but towards the end, because of a lot of like issues and that sort of stuff, with basically the church's perception of my life choices in getting married to this guy who was a loser, they basically abandoned me. So I just kind of like, you know, I had nothing to do with them at all after that. So in my, I guess, attempt to kind of like gain solace and get some insight into what was going to happen, you know, some of my staff, you know, were very superstitious and used to dabble in like, you know,
things.
Yeah, that sort of stuff, you know, and they saw some fortune tellers on my behalf without my knowledge, saying, oh, look, you know, so when I saw this fortune teller, she's very good, she got a lot of things right about, you know, about me. And then I asked her about you, and she said, oh yeah, you know, she's having a baby and it's going to be a boy, and don't worry, they will be okay, you know, both she and her baby will be okay. And I use that as the basis for my confidence in coming out of this in one piece, you know. It's very, very flaky, I know, but you know, at that time it was like, you know, you take whatever you can get. So regardless of how misguided it was, and I actually, after that, when I heard that, I went seeking out some other, like, you know, I guess fortune tellers and whatever, and you know, some of them said he was going to be okay, some of them said he wasn't, and some said he was going to be a boy, some said he was going to be a girl, but whatever, for some reason I just zoned in on the ones who said the right things, the things that I wanted to hear, you know. And it's quite funny, they'll tell you like, you know, 20 different things, and one of them will be he's going to be a boy and he's going to be okay, and then 2 years down the track you look back, or you know, of the 20 things they told you, they got 18 things wrong. So, unknown in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have put a lot of faith into what they were saying, but you know, at that time that actually gave me solace. But in terms of my NICU experience per se, I know a lot of people want to hear about this. I think, how long were you in NICU with your baby for, Shanti?
I was actually in there for 18 days. My little man didn't survive.
Sure, sure.
I went in at 26 weeks, and he was actually doing better, and then he went the other way, actually the day of my anniversary. And so completely different NICU experience. Completely different NICU experience.
Sure,
Actually,
yeah.
can you share one of your low moments with us and how you made it through one of your low moments in the NICU unit?
Sure. You know, it's quite interesting because he was called up. I was called up in the middle of the night 3 times to tell, you know, to be told he was dying and basically get ready for it. Some of the low moments, I guess, would be, you know, he had what was called hydrops fatalis, and I had not heard of that. They had died. We knew he had a AVSD. We knew that he had duodenal atresia, but which needed life-saving surgery. But hydrops was something that came on that we found out. The reason why I was having trouble was because he had hydrops, and with any normal pregnancy, any baby afflicted with hydrops, 9 out of 10 will die. Okay, those are the stats. So it was not looking good. And I did not know until after, you know, after he'd been there for a month that, you know, they basically what happens at NICU was they have a rotational kind of like a consultant in charge per week, okay, and they rotated through about 4 or 5 of them, so each week you'll see a different one, and different ones actually have quite different takes on his condition, okay. Some are more optimistic and some are more negative, and some actually apply their own personal beliefs into their judgment as to, you know, what next steps should be. And with him, at the 5th week stage, just after I was called in one night, I was to be told he was dying, right? That particular consulting, whatever, management consultant, whatever you call it, she pulled me inside and said, look, you know, high drops and downs is not survivable. You know, just like that, I was thinking, nobody has told me that before. And the way she told me it was just as a matter of fact, like, you know, surely you must know high drops and downs is just not survivable, and high drops beyond the 1 month mark is not survivable. And he not only had downs, but he'd had it for a month by that stage, okay. So I was basically told to get ready for him to die. I was told, look, you know, because I was alone. Like I said, you know, I went through this journey. I was there 217 days, and of the 217 days, maybe 5 days we had visitors, okay, but most of the time I tackled this on my own. And my mom passed away when I was 6 years old, and this was all the way back in Malaysia where I came from. And, you know, it's quite interesting because, you know, you hear stories about, you know, people, what they were like that you don't quite remember. I never heard people say about my mom that, oh, she was the life of the party. You never heard people say, oh, she was a, you know, she was loved by everyone. People generally said she was strong and silent, you know. And also some people said she was a bit aloof, you know, a little bit cocky, not cocky, but a little bit, you know, I guess, you know, I don't even know. Yeah. So I think, you know, I think I carry some of that trait without, you know, having a clear memory of that. You know, it's this kind of, I guess, determination, this stoicism, I think, with my mom was sometimes mistaken for aloofness. And I think I came across that way as well in the hospital. So a lot of time I came out, if you saw the photos, and I've posted them on my personal blog, which is serumbangirl.com, but if you go to jackiem.com.au, that will actually have links to my personal blog. If you see the photos in the hospital where I was carrying Noah, I was always smiling. And I was usually actually dressed quite, you know, presentably, you know. Yeah. I didn't look like a train wreck or anything like that. And that was kind of like my you know, a conscious decision. That was my, you know, it's kind of like my defiance towards my circumstances. Kind of, I'm not going to let this beat me down, sort of thing. So what happened, you know, with that, when you get those kinds of bad news, and that was one of the very few times I actually broke down in the hospital. I went home. And I researched hydrops fatalis and Down syndrome, okay? And I found that there were actually not many. It's like you trying to do what you're doing with NICU now. There's very little information out there about this sort of stuff, you know. The reality is with hydrops, there's very little known, you know, medical, you know, kind of like literature on it. And I found someone who mentioned they had a Down syndrome baby who did have hydrops when he was young. And then I found out someone else who had a baby with hydrops who did make it past the 12-month stage, the 1 month stage, sort of thing. So that kind of gave me a little bit of solace that, you know, whatever the doctors tell you, you know,
you don't necessarily have to go by.
Yeah, that's right. You know, I actually challenged the doctor right there and then. What are the statistics? Where's the literature? And she basically said, look, there's almost none in existence by virtue of the fact that Noah really should not be alive now, because basically to her, I kind of cheated death by having, artificially prolonged his life by, the steroid injections and the monitoring and the emergency cesarean and that sort of stuff. But to me, at what point do you decide, like, to kind of like keep a hands-off approach and let him die, And there was this other consulting physician who, again...
Can I interject real quick, Jackie?
Yeah.
Will you explain to everybody what Hydrox is?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's basically... the way they described it, and I try and wrap my head around it, essentially what happened when he was born, there was basically water leaking out of his systems, out of his blood cells and all that, making him all puffy sort of thing. They were leaking, like, he was getting water built up in his lungs because for some reason his blood system and all that wasn't able to kind of like keep the water in. And apparently there's no known cure for hydrops, and it really is dependent on what the cause of the hydrops is. It could be maybe, say for argument's sake, okay, it could be maybe he had a faulty kidney or something like that. Then basically they would treat what the source of the problem was, and that was what the doctor told me. Look, there's no known cure for it. There's no nobody really knows what to do. And essentially what they ended up doing was they tried steroids. There were 3 different types of steroids that they thought they could try. There's no guarantee they would work. So they tried one, did not work. Tried another one, did not work. The third one, the final one, they tried, and it seemed to work. And then he was due to go in for his bowel surgery to save his life. Okay, so they had to stop all medication. They gave him the bowel surgery, and he nearly died from that as well. Okay, so I was called in the middle of the night after his bowel surgery to be told he was dying. They managed to save him then, and it's quite interesting. And another thing that, there are a lot of unknowns in the whole situation, and you don't know how severely damaged your baby is. You don't know how much aware of their circumstances they are. And I think a lot of parents, regardless of the fact that he had Down syndrome or otherwise, a lot of parents would think, he's lying there, does he even know what's going on around him? The doctor's trying to tell you, look, he's comfortable, he's being managed comfortably, I should consider kind of letting him be and die, withdrawing, denying him the surgeries that he needed, sort of thing, What's that?
The screen froze while you were speaking. I was like, oh no, we're freezing.
Oh, okay. Okay, sure. Yeah, but one of the nurses told me this story. There was a Thai baby in there with the Thai mother, and the baby was dying and was not responding to anything at all. And the mother held the baby in her arms and started singing to him. Okay, and then the baby got better. Okay, I thought that's kind of interesting. You kind of assume that your baby doesn't know anything, and that's what happened with Noah. On the first night I was called in to be told he was dying, I was told they were running like hourly tests on his, on him, like blood tests, and they were finding a particular level. I think it was called lactic acid level, sort of thing, climbing. Every single hour that they ran the test, it was going up to the point when I turned up at about 3 a.m. in the hospital. They said he was at pre-death levels. Okay, he was just about to die, and they did not know what to try next. They were sure that maybe the bowel surgery, had gone wrong to the point where they were basically calling in the bowel from earlier in the day, saying, look, maybe your team left something in his bowel, to be causing this really strange reading. And they wanted to wheel him away to have his bowel cut open again to see if that, and there was this big debate about what was going on. When I came in, when they ran the test for the first time that night, that particular reading dropped by a tiny bit. Okay, and I don't know if the baby knew I was even there. And then they said, look, we have to wait. We have to wait and do another test in another hour. Okay, so I basically was there for about 20 hours. And each time after that, after I arrived, the reading kept dropping. So I don't know if it's pure coincidence or what, but I think, regardless of what you get told about how little a baby is aware of his circumstances and that sort of stuff, I think you have to hold strong to the faith that your presence does make a difference, okay? And another time when because I was there for, you know, like I said, 7 months ultimately, after the first 6 weeks or so, you know, the other consulting physician pulled me aside and basically told me, look, at this point, really, you know, the 6 to 8 week mark is when the parents start basically thinking maybe it's better, maybe the doctors are right, maybe we should kind of like, you know, and then, you know, and to me it's second guessing, you know. Yeah. It's like, maybe it's better for the baby that we let him die in peace, okay? And, you know, it's like, you know, like 6 to 8 week mark is when the parents start thinking, look, you know, we need to get on with our lives. We need to kind of like, you know, make a call on this and decide to, like, you know, just let things go. And I was thinking, no, it's not going to happen with me. And he got kind of frustrated and said, look, you know, I can tell looking at you that you're the sort of person who's never given up in your life, okay? But it's not about giving up, it's about giving in, okay? They said basically I was faced with decisions about his heart, you know, because his heart was failing sooner than they wanted, you know, they had to, you know, and at that time I was still like really determined to get on with my life because I ran a restaurant, I own a restaurant, and I had to delegate a lot of stuff out. But, you know, apart from everything else, I had to prove to people that, you know, I had basically people who looked up to me, you know. I couldn't really be in a position to fall to pieces and kind of like risk my business, risk my staff and everything, you know. So I had that vested interest in making sure, you know, in keeping up appearances, you know, for one better phrase. So, you know, some of the pictures I posted on my blog, therumbangirl.com, by the way, you know, that I posted on my blog, the pictures of events that I attended. And one of the events that I did was basically a pop-up restaurant event to kind of celebrate Jackie M's return after a, you know, 6 or 8 week, you know, kind of like disappearing from the scene because of issues with her personal life and that sort of stuff with my baby and all that, you know. And about 2 days before the event, we've been selling tickets to this pop-up event, you know, and there were like some fairly like high profile guests who were going to be attending. About 2 days or 1 day before the event, I found out that the doctors figured, you know, he had to have open heart surgery to try and fix his heart, okay? And of course, my collaborators said, look, you know, we can refund all the tickets and whatever. I said, no, let's go ahead and let's do it, you know. So I did it, and I had to give speeches, and I had to post the photos and all that. But each time in between, I was running to the back of the restaurant and making phone calls and asking the hospital how did he go and all that. And I was told, even though this was essentially a banding procedure to put a band around his heart to try and like kind of like you know, let him kind of like sustain him, you know, until he's a bit older to have full on, you know, surgery. They said, look, there's going to be a 10% chance he's not going to come out of this alive, sort of thing. So it was pretty tough going. But like I said, you know, if you look at my photos and that sort of stuff, you're going to you're going to find that you know, that it looks, I mean, and I think people might find this to be a little bit on the nose. But, you know, I was smiling through a lot of events. I was a guest chef at the Google headquarters over here in Sydney, you know. I was on TV the same morning when he was due to be wheeled in for a procedure to find out, you know, exploratory procedure that was apparently going to have, again, a 10%, you know, chance of him not making out of it alive. And I was on Australian morning TV at the time, you know, doing some cooking demonstration or whatever. So every single time, you know, I basically kind of like made a point of actually just trying to keep up appearances. And also it's quite interesting, about a day after I gave birth, I actually got a message from Google Australia. And this is, you know, if you remember, this is going back 2 years ago now. Google Hangouts on Air that we're using right now was quite new. Actually, in fact, they hadn't even launched it yet. They were just about to launch it. But prior to that, I had been doing like private Hangouts with a group of people talking about like a particular subject matter on Google Plus here. And that caught the attention of Google Australia when they were about to launch Google Hangouts on Air. They contacted me, and I was in my hospital bed, and they wanted to do a hangout with me. And so I don't know, we actually did a hangout or did a Skype call, which would be quite ironic. And they said, look, we want you to be one of the key people to help kind of like bring Google Hangouts on air, you know, kind of like promote it through your business activities and that sort of stuff. And I said, okay, sounds good. And, you know, by virtue of that, I think that's how they kind of like put my name on the people to follow list on Google Plus, which is how I essentially ended up with like 1.8 million followers, you know. I mean, I went in, I had like less than 4,000 followers, you know, pretty decent number, but not crazy, but it just kind of like snowballed from there. And I think the lesson from that is that really, you know, you cannot be in a position to put your life on hold while you're going through all this, okay? Certainly, I mean, you know, if that's what you want to do, by all means, go for it. But to me, the way I saw it was I was so alone in the world, and my focus was on Noah. And to me, you know, I didn't want to be pathetic. Like I said, I had a lot of, like, you know, pretty rough hands dealt to me. And I didn't want, I was thinking, like, what happens in 10 years, in 20 years? Noah is going to be always disabled. And that's the other thing that annoyed me about the way the doctors talk to me as well, was they talk to you like sometimes, you know, that, you know, they talk down to you, you know, they'll pull you aside and say, look, you know, I want you to know that his bowel we can fix, his heart we can fix, but Down syndrome, we can't fix that, you know. It's like, what, you know?
I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah, that's right, you know. So it's like, to me, you know, he was always going to be at a disadvantage in life, you know, and I did not want to be that. To me, it's, you know, it gives me more incentive to really kind of like step up to the plate and really have him be in a position where he will be envied as opposed to being pitied, you know, me and him both, you know. Yeah. And that continues to this day, because some people, I mean, I take him with me everywhere. When I go traveling, you know, for business and that sort of stuff, when I go into boardroom meetings, I take him with me. And sometimes it's not ideal. I went into this conference with the Malaysian trade minister last week or 2 weeks ago, and he was screaming in this big conference hall with all these, you know, sort of things. Yes. What you got to do. And to me, again, you know, it reminds me, okay, are they ever going to invite me back to this kind of event? Are they ever going to invite me back to their office for a meeting? But the way I see it is, if I make myself indispensable enough, if I make myself good enough at my job, you know, which is basically Malaysian food, Malaysian cooking and that sort of stuff, you know, that will be, you know, basically that will kind of overcome whatever, you know, whatever downside they see in me having a little baby in tow and that sort of stuff. So, like I said, every little possible setback just gives me more determination to kind of like really push harder and do better. Yeah, and in terms of like, I know people want to know a little bit about the NICU environment and that sort of stuff as well. I don't know what it is like over at the one that you were in, but things that were a little bit unusual to me was the fact that a lot of stuff run off computers, computer monitoring and that sort of stuff. So a lot of the time the nurses will be sitting with their backs to him or with their back basically next to him, and they would be monitoring the screen a little bit, you know, a little bit more than you think was necessary. You know,
that is actually a bit different.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, like they monitored the screens and things, but they did a lot of hands-on with him. My little one, his nickname was Jutu. I haven't done my own hangout yet. I'll do my hangout soon. But they did a lot of hands-on, very different.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
But these ones, it's like, you know, they have all these alarms and monitors and all that. You know, they have all these screens monitoring his blood pressure, his whatever, his breathing and all that sort of stuff. And it would be like, you know, they'll be just typing away on the screen, you know, I guess, you know, filing reports or whatever. And then if something goes off, they'll look at it and they'll go check on him, sort of thing, you know. And I'm not trying to judge how they do their job, but from a parental point of view, you're thinking, well, shouldn't you be like, kind of like, you know, yeah, I guess, like I said, it's just something that you got to wrap your head around a little bit. And it gets to the point where you start doing what they're doing, you know, when the alarm goes off, you just turn it off. They tell you, look, okay, if that alarm goes off, just turn it off. I was thinking, like, yeah, because some of them are so incredibly sensitive that, you know, they'll just beep for, like, you know, the slightest thing, you know, and if you're there for, like, and I was there for 5 hours a day on average, sort of thing, you know, so it's like after a while you help them turn it off. And the other thing that I noticed about the NICU as well was that we weren't allowed to plug any electrical equipment into the electrical, you know, so like infrastructure there in case you kind of like brought down the whole, you know, computer. So that would not be good.
Please don't take that system down.
Yeah, so those are just practical things you got to keep in mind, you know. And also, I had to buy like a Wi-Fi, like, you know, kind of like a card for my laptop and that sort of stuff. So you got to keep in mind, you know, you're only going to use your laptop for a couple of hours before it runs out of battery. You're going to get like a Wi-Fi card and whatever. If you're going to spend long hours there, you know, and the connection can be really, really flaky as well, sort of thing, you know. And also the other thing about the NICU I was at, you were technically only allowed 2 visitors by the bedside, by the baby's bedside at any one time, okay? Then did not enforce this strongly, I have to admit that, you know, because I see other families, you know, with a whole, you know, bunch of people around them, and the doctors were never that bothered by it. And there was one time, it's quite interesting, because one of your questions that you asked me before we came on was something that was funny that happened, you know. It wasn't funny at the time, but, you know, the NICU staff are very well trained to handle people in our circumstances. Basically, they know how to talk to you, they know how, you know, not to kind of like basically rile you, you know, because they know you're going through a lot at the moment. But what happened with my NICU was they had a temporary staff fill in for someone who was on maternity leave, and she didn't know any better, I guess, and she was an older Australian woman, and me being Asian. Okay, like I said, you know, there was there were families who came and went, and that sort of stuff. I was there for the long haul, and families came and went that have like big groups in there in the NICU, you know, with their family and that sort of stuff. Never a problem. I came in once, like I said, you know, after 217 days, so it was maybe about 5 days I had visitors. Okay, I came in once where a couple of my staff from my restaurant, and I run a Malaysian restaurant by its nature. Malaysia is a predominantly Muslim country, so my staff are Muslim, and some of them wore this conservative garb and that sort of stuff. So they came in, and there were 4 of us all together came in to the NICU to see Noah, and this woman who was out there, she was basically at reception. She stormed over to me, and she, right in front of my staff, which really riled me because, to me, I'm there to be to set an example for people. I was kind of like the queen bee, so to speak, if you want a better expression. She came to me and talked to me as though I was a schoolgirl. She said, "How dare you? You are not supposed to have more than one person with you at any one time. You send these people out right now," sort of thing. I was thinking, oh my God, did someone just talk to me like that? So my staff, like I said, they were younger, and they were, they were Muslim. They were, dressed, accordingly. They kind of scurried out, and I was extremely, extremely embarrassed, infuriated, and frankly hurt, So, we left, we walked out, and there's this kind of like a suggestion box for parents of NICU. So I scrolled this really, really long complaint, and of course, me being me, I'm fairly libertarian in my thinking. I'm not kind of like that sensitive about race issues and that sort of stuff, but I played the race card big time there. If you know anything about Sydney, Australia, Sydney is a fairly liberal city, and they're very, very sensitive about kind of cultural, sensitivities and that sort of stuff. And as soon as I mentioned racism, all of the management kind of oh my God, what did we just do, sort of thing. So they pulled me aside and said, "Look, we're very, very sorry, we're going to have to talk to her, and that sort of she doesn't actually work for us. She's actually a contractor who was brought in to replace someone and all that." So they talked to her, and then they wanted her, she wanted to come over and apologize to me personally. I said, "Look, I'm going through too much at the moment. I don't even want to see her. I don't want to talk to her and whatever and that sort of stuff, But she was really persistent. She felt so incredibly bad at yelling at me in front of all my staff. At some point she did corner me. And I thought, oh God, do we have to go through this? I've got my dying baby here, and now you want to apologize, and this is just going to get bad. She said, "I'm really sorry. I really did not mean, I did not, I wasn't being insensitive about your culture and all that, but, just the day before I've had to deal with a bunch of rowdy Arabs." I was thinking, rowdy Arabs? Did I just hear you say that?
You did not say that. No, don't say that.
I thought that was so funny. Oh my God. But anyway, that was just one of those little stories that came out from my experience. But, I think from my perspective, I were to give advice to other people is that I've just by observation of other parents and how they were dealing with their situation, you really have to kind of let the doctors do their job and kind of pick your fights, I guess. I think ultimately, there were a few times, not a few times, at least a couple of times where they made the wrong call on Noah. Someone actually overdosed him on one particular medication, that sort of stuff. I was asked whether I wanted to lodge a formal complaint and that sort of stuff. But really, from my perspective, my focus is on kind of letting the doctors do their job. It wasn't it wasn't out of any negligence. It was just because, his condition, by all accounts, was so incredibly complex that, you know, they need teams and teams of medical professionals to deal with all these. They said his basically medical condition was as complicated as it could get. And you're talking about this particular hospital that essentially is the biggest in our part of the world in terms of, you know, in terms of its ability to deal with these really, really complex medical issues. So I think, you know, you have to have enough faith in the doctors, but you also have to be able to kind of recognize the fact that, you know, they're human as well. And the doctor, there was a particular doctor, and he was in NICU for 100 days ultimately. And there were some things about my experience where I think, from my perspective, they were a little bit morbid, because death was always overhanging the whole, you know, everything. When he, at some point, when he was about to go in for his first heart surgery, they said they'd been approached by a volunteer photography group or something like that. What they do is they go around to NICU parents and offer to take photos of their baby, okay, with them in the courtyard, and no one never actually left the ward until he was 6 months old. He actually went out into the courtyard for the first time in 6 months. But
wow.
Basically what we can do, they said, look, we can coordinate with the medical staff, because he was always wearing all kinds of tubes and wires and all that sort of stuff. What we can do is coordinate with them to get him all cleaned up, all the tubes removed and cleaned up. And you can take him out into the courtyard for a few minutes, and they'll have a volunteer photographer take photos of you and him, okay? And basically, you know, they say in case he doesn't make it out of that operation alive, you know. So there was always that specter of him dying, you know, at the drop of a hat. But to me, that was kind of like a little bit morbid. So I said, no thanks, but no thanks, you know. And also, when Noah turned 100 days, the nurses, I was away that day, I was working, the nurses took it on themselves to clean him up, remove all his tubes and all that sort of stuff, and take a photo of him and made a card for him and say, oh, happy 100 days and that sort of stuff. So they do, yeah, they give you that a little bit of a personal touch and that sort of stuff to make you, I guess, stay a little bit more bearable. But I think, you know, like I said, you don't want to let this kind of thing like overwhelm you, you know. So, and another time as well, the same doctor told me that, you know, he was about to die on me, and she basically said, look, you have to get someone in with you to support you for when he dies, okay? And you might want to capture that moment when he's in your arms and capture it on video. I was thinking, why the hell would I want to do that?
Capture that? No.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, like I said, it's just not my thing. To me, I was just focused on keeping him alive. So I think, like, ultimately, you know, I was faced with a lot of decisions. You know, the NICU doctor who, you know, he wanted Noah to have his heart surgery right there and then. He says, from my perspective, he's never going to get any better, and we have this little window of opportunity for him to have his final heart surgery. And the problem with us doing it now is he's going to be hooked up to, I don't even know what the unit is called now, and that is going to cause further brain damage on him, okay? Which, you know, they said, you know, from what they can see, he's already, like, you know, essentially brain damage from all the treatments he's had to undergo. But once they have this heart surgery, he's going to be basically a vegetable for the rest of his life. And he says you can either have that surgery now or deny him the surgery and let him die. Okay, those are my two options. And then the cardiac team steps in and say, no, we're not going to do the surgery now because it's too risky for him, and we don't want to be basically the ones who kill him. So I think,
yeah, cardiac team.
Yeah, that's right. And the NICU guy was really upset about it, you know. He's like, you know, basically the cardiac team says no, wait, you know. And this NICU doctor is making out that waiting is not going to help, and waiting might make it worse and that sort of stuff. So it's either now or never sort of thing. And when I said, okay, let's go with the cardiac team, let's not, you know, let's wait, he kind of basically said, okay, well, in that case, you know, our team here at NICU have run out of ideas. And I'm going to make arrangements for him to be transferred out into pediatric ICU, okay, he says, because frankly, we need the bed over here. So I thought that was pretty brutal.
That's the doctor that told you that he needed the bed.
Yeah, that's right. I thought that was pretty brutal. I think, like, and when I spoke to another one of his associates, they said, yeah, he's been known to apply his own philosophy to the patient care as well. And you got to be very wary of that. Some of them are, like I said, pretty cool. A couple of them, at least that I can think of. One of them actually saved his life. One of them was pretty cool, kind of like, okay, we need to do this, and and then we'll wait a while, and I'm going to do this with him. I'm going to do that, and then you can take him home. So it all sounded hunky dory. He may have kind of like, made it sound a little bit too easy because it didn't pan out that way, but he was always like upbeat and optimistic and always had a plan of action. Whereas this one was always telling me, look, let him die. He's not, from my perspective, he's never going to be a productive member of society. And, what's going to happen, you're not young anymore. What's going to happen when you're a bit older is going to look after it, which is why, like I said, instead of being beaten down by it, it gives me even more determination and more incentive, can kind of like ramp up my, my business activities to the point where, everything is going to kind of like, fast track everything really, instead of kind of like sit down and kind of like think, oh, that's it, that's the end of my life, and I'm going to have to kind of like deal with it, sort of thing. So yeah, that's kind of like my NICU experience. And of course I don't want to go into like what happened over the next 100 days and that sort of stuff, because that's PQ and all the other stuff now. But actually, in a nutshell,
what's funny is I gave you 3 of my questions, you answered about, and I had for you about 10 questions. And I was like, I don't have to interject. I just need to let her share her story. And you answered that. I actually have 3 questions for you, but I'm going to ask them one at a time.
Okay.
Parent-to-parent advice or parent-to-parent tip. What would you tell parents who are entrepreneurs and are going through that traumatic situation? What would be the one thing you would say, if you're going through this traumatic situation of the NICU, this is how I survived, and I think you can too as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if I have all the right answers, but I was determined, like I said, not to let this situation get me down. So I made a point of actually delegating a lot of the work to other people, okay? And and having done that, it turned out that a lot of the delegation was kind of like misplaced, because I ended up selling my restaurant and all that. But really, if you're an entrepreneur, I think you basically bring to the table, a certain kind of resilience, a certain kind of creative thinking and that sort of stuff, and that these kind of traits will serve you well in your quest. It's never kind of like one way, my way or the highway and that sort of. You're just gonna kind of have to adapt and kind of like make the best of every situation. Like I said, I was kind of like to some extent in the right place at the right time. Or if you were, if you were close-minded, you might think, oh, this is the worst time for Google to contact me. This is the worst time for me to have been invited to go on TV and that sort of stuff. And I actually, when I was actually in NICU, like I said, because of the lack of internet access and that sort of stuff, I did a lot of reading, and I read a lot of aspirational stuff. Okay, how to do this and how to do that, self-help stuff. And and it helps to have kind of like a wild imagination, because then you start thinking about all things about you can do. And at some point in time, I actually like I said, one of the ways I tackled my situation was kind of like to think ahead, thinking, oh, look, one day I'll be able to tell my story and inspire other people, and think that, your life does not get put on hold. Do not put your life on hold, whatever you do, I actually try to ramp it up. I actually, I had done little bits of TV up until that point in time, just kind of like breakfast TV, cooking, segments and that sort of stuff. But at that point, when I was in hospital, it was the first time I actually sent out an email. I tracked down via research on the internet the name of the CEO of a Malaysian TV conglomerate. I sent him a very well-written email saying, look, I'm interested in pursuing a TV project with your network. He said, send him the proposal. He said, great, let me get my team onto it, and then 1 month after Noah got discharged out of hospital, I actually flew over to Malaysia to make a TV show, sort of thing. So it goes to show that, if you use this kind of challenge as, to motivate you to push harder and push, to aim higher, things can work out. Who in the hospital, with a cesarean, who just had a cesarean, gets a message from Google, and who in the right mind to think, I'm going to take this call right now and talk to them as though, hey, thanks for calling, but I've just delivered a baby, but let me get back to you in 5 days, okay? And that's what I did. And I was, I just did not want to let it get me down. And like I said, I like to say it was a bed of roses, and obviously it wasn't, because there were a lot of little stories here and there that I haven't been able to like kind of relay here, sort of thing. I don't think it's the right forum for it. But really, I think I'd like to think that if a single parent of a disabled baby, who spent 7 months in hospital, can do it and still come out of it, laughing about it, I think anyone can,
Yeah.
And like I said, whatever the doctors tell you, if you're committed to kind of like preserving your son's life, do it. Don't let them second guess, what's going to happen, that sort of stuff. They were telling me a lot of things, like, oh, look, he's only got essentially 2 cups of blood in the system now, we can't just keep withdrawing blood, for tests and that sort of stuff, like, we have to pin him down, he's screaming, he's squirming and all that, and we're having trouble digging blood out of him, and he's bruised all over. Are you sure you want him to go through that trauma? And it's funny, after they told me that, I met this kid at this farmer's market that I have run a market stall at. I met this kid who basically spent a few months in hospital when he was little as well, and he was by now he was about 17, 18 years old, and he was the son of this other market stall holder, and he likes to come over and have a talk with me, and if ever you see me at a trading or working, don't try and like kick off a conversation with me, because I'm really focused on my work, okay? So to me, when he comes over and talks to me, it's kind of like, oh God, what does this kid want now, sort of thing. But for the first time, I actually said, look, kiddo, I know you spent a long time in hospital when you were little. Do you remember the trauma that you went through? Do you remember, because mother said the same thing, look, they had to take a lot of blood out of him for tests and that sort of stuff. I said, no, he doesn't remember any of it, and he's like the happiest kid in the world. And that kind of like gave me kind of like comfort to think that, whatever Noah is going through now, he's not going to remember it. And if you look at him now, any photo, any video you see of him, he's like the happiest kid in the world. He has no memory of any of that. So, don't let the doctors talk you down to the point where you think, where you start to second guess, oh, it's better for the baby if I let him die. Okay, if you're committed to trying to save him, do it.
Yeah.
So.
Second question.
Okay.
From parent-to-parent advice. From the heart of a mother to another mother, what would you say?
It's quite interesting, because I wanted to end with this point, but really, I talk about how happy Noah is, how well adjusted he is. I mean, it's a long road ahead of us, and I have no idea how it's going to turn out in the future. But the reality of the matter is, I think, just really focus on your baby, okay? Whatever else happens around the world, it doesn't matter, sort of thing. And if you're, like I said, if you're as committed as I am about, like, the value of human life, the value of his life, sort of thing, to me, it's a bonus that he's turned out well. But even if the doctors were right and he is going to be a non-productive human being for the rest of his life, even if he was going to be a vegetable for the rest of his life, I think I made the right call. And you need to draw comfort from that, okay? And you need to reconcile yourself with that before you launch yourself into this big journey, because I'm not in the position to try and like tell you what you should believe and that sort of stuff. But really, ultimately, I think, you have to, from my perspective, I went in thinking, okay, like I said, I was a little bit deluded in thinking everything's going to be hunky-dory and that sort of stuff, because he came so very, very close so many times. But the fact is, once I reconcile myself with the fact that there's a strong possibility, this may not end up well, and no, in the worst case scenario is he could die, okay? If you can reconcile yourself with that and you can see your life going on beyond that, then, focus on the present and focus on saving him, okay? And that's how I kind of approached it.
I would say my last question to you is, actually, I'm going to twist my last question. If you could go back and say something to your NICU doctors and nurses, what would you do? Holding Noah and showing them Noah, what would you say and what would you do?
It's quite interesting. I think they kind of had me figured out. They knew I was so tenacious I wasn't going to kind of like give an inch. But if I could go back now and tell them, I would say, hey, look, you were wrong, I was right, sort of thing, and I've actually, a couple of times, because Noah still has to go into hospital for regular checkups and that sort of stuff. So a few times, NICU is actually a highly secured environment. So you have to press a buzzer, and they have to look at you on camera, and they have to let you in and that sort of stuff. And you can't bring any kids who haven't been, like, up to date with the immunization in and all that kind of stuff, But a couple of times I press on the buzzer and nobody opens the door, and I don't know if they were too busy, like, minding other patients, or whether they see, oh, damn, it's that woman, she's here to gloat or something like that. But hell, I would gloat, if ever I saw them again, that would be the first thing I would do. I'd say, hey, you were wrong, look at how well he's turned out, and I've bumped into a couple of the doctors, when he's been there, sort of thing, and they've just been amazed. I mean, they actually warned me when he checked out. It's quite interesting, because on the day that he was discharged, it was quite emotional, but I didn't want to show it again, because I had actually a friend, he's not even like, someone from my family or something like that. He was just a customer, good restaurant customer of mine, sort of thing. He came along on the video, the whole event, and I was that close to breaking down and crying. After 7 months, he finally gets to go home. But one thing, I mean, first of all, I didn't want to look bad on camera, but the other thing was, the doctors reminded me, look, he could be back anytime. You're going to spend the rest of your life in and out of hospital, and again, that's something you have to deal with. And the reality is, he hasn't had to go back. He's done so well, so it's really quite amazing. Nobody can predict what's going to happen. The medical professionals don't have all the answers. Let them do their jobs, because they're better at it than you are, so don't get in their way and that sort of stuff. But again, just keep in mind, do a lot of research, read up on everything, and just challenge them as well. When I mentioned at some point they withdrew that third steroid treatment from him because of his bowel surgery, and after he recovered from bowel surgery from that near death, his high drops came back, and I had to remind them, what about that third steroid that you were feeding him that seemed to be having some impact? I said, yeah, we'll put him back on. I was thinking, if I hadn't brought it up, would they have thought of it? I don't know. You know what I mean? And again, that's what actually ultimately fixed him. So it's been a very, very long journey, but really, I don't want to get all biblical, because I don't even go to church anymore. But I would say, that quote from Paul the Apostle, where he said, I fought the good fight. I finished the race and I kept the faith, and that's exactly how I feel about my journey with NICU, really. So ultimately, are you prepared to kind of like stick it out for the long haul? And that's how I feel.
That is a great quote to end on, Jackie. That is a great quote. And I want to say thank you so much for sharing tonight. Thank you for freely telling your story, the good, bad, the ugly. Look forward to talking to you again. And for everybody else, thank you for joining us from Parent Parent.
You bet. Thanks again, Shanti. Bye-bye.